He was warned a lion would kill him, yet he walked toward it anyway. They warned him a lion would tear him apart. But when Evan Miller walked toward the injured beast, something unbelievable happened. A wild lion didn't attack. He recognized him. And that single moment sparked a chain of events no one on Earth was prepared for. This is the story of the day instinct broke, and a connection no one thought possible was born. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Silver Mesa Wildlife Reserve, turning the desert grassland into a wash of gold and copper. Evan Miller was halfway through his patrol when a sound ripped through the stillness. A deep, guttural roar that shook the air like thunder rolling across metal. He froze for a second, instinct kicking in before thought. That wasn't just any lion's roar. It carried pain, panic, a sharp edge of desperation. He sprinted toward the southern fence line, boots kicking up dust, his radio crackling with frantic voices he barely heard. When he rounded the last bend of mesquite shrubs, he saw it. Rex, the African lion recently brought in from a failed private reserve. The giant animal thrashed violently, one massive front paw swallowed by a twisted coil of barbed wire at the base of the old fence. Every time Rex lunged backward, the wire dug deeper, slicing into his paw, opening fresh wounds that dripped onto the sand in dark red beads. Visitors who'd been walking a nearby trail were already retreating fast, clutching their hats and bags as they backed away from the shaking earth. A couple stood frozen near a boulder, staring wide-eyed at the snarling animal. Two junior staff members waved their arms, shouting for everyone to move back. Over the chaos, Evan heard his supervisor's voice blasting through the radio. "Miller, do not engage. Back off and wait for the vet team. That's an order." The command hung in the air, sharp and absolute. Evan knew the protocol. Every employee did. No one approached a distressed predator without sedation on board and a full crew in place. That rule had been drilled into him every year since he joined the reserve. But rules suddenly felt distant, drowned out by another roar that tore from Rex's throat, so raw and pained it made Evan's chest tighten. He stepped closer, his breath catching at the sight of the damage. The barbed wire was wrapped around Rex's paw 3 times, each strand pulled so tight it looked fused into the flesh. Blood streaked the lion's golden fur and dripped onto the sand, forming uneven dark spots that made Evan's stomach turn. Rex's sides heaved as he fought against the restraint, his mane shaking with every strained breath. For a moment, the great animal stopped struggling and looked straight at Evan, eyes bright amber, wide with something that wasn't pure rage. It was fear. It was pain. It was a plea. "Miller, stand down! Do you hear me?" The order snapped again through the static. Evan swallowed hard, but his feet didn't move backward. Instead, they moved forward, almost on their own. The wind carried the hot scent of dust and iron, the unmistakable sting of blood. The whole scene felt suspended, every sound muffled except the harsh rasp of Rex's breathing and the faint rattle of loose wire shifting under tension. A volunteer yelled, "He's gonna get himself killed! Pull him back!" But Evan's focus narrowed until the noise disappeared entirely. All he saw was the lion, the injured paw, the blood darkening the ground, the slow slump of Rex's shoulders as exhaustion began to overpower fury. This animal had survived years in miserable captivity before being rescued. He had just begun learning what freedom felt like. And now here he was, terrified, hurting, trapped again. Evan took another step in, hands up, palms out. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." The lion's ears flicked, his gaze sharpening. Evan felt the weight of that stare deep in his bones. Fear crawled up his spine. But beneath it, something else stirred. A pull. A recognition he couldn't explain. The ground vibrated as Rex let out another roar, this one weaker, laced with strain. His muscular body tensed, then sagged, his paw jerking helplessly against the metal teeth. Evan's gut clenched. If they waited for the vet team, Rex might shred his paw beyond saving or go into shock from the stress and heat. Evan edged closer to the wire. "Hang on, big guy," he breathed. "I'm not walking away." The wind blew dust around his ankles. The sky seemed to dim for a heartbeat as he crossed the invisible threshold. The line every ranger knew meant life or death. The last thing he heard behind him was someone shouting, "Evan, stop!" But he didn't. He couldn't. Because the moment he saw that blood on the red New Mexico sand, something inside him shifted. The world narrowed to a single truth. If he left Rex like this, he'd be leaving him to die alone. And Evan Miller had made a silent promise long ago that he'd never let another living creature die alone. Not if he could change it. So he stepped fully into the danger, knowing everyone said he'd die for it. But in that instant, as Rex's eyes locked on his, Evan felt something deeper than fear. He felt the beginning of a connection he did not yet understand. The lion's chest rose and fell in harsh, uneven waves, each breath rattling through his massive frame. Dust clung to the damp fur around his mouth and mane, and the fading sunlight caught in his amber eyes, giving them an almost human brightness. Evan moved slowly, his boots brushing over the sand, with a quiet whisper. He lifted his hands slightly, palms out, the universal signal of peace, even if a lion didn't need the gesture explained. Somehow, Evan believed Rex understood it anyway. The big cat's gaze tracked every inch of his movement, but he didn't lunge, didn't snarl in warning. Instead, the tremor in his body seemed less like aggression and more like fear, pain, and pure exhaustion. Behind Evan, voices rose again, scared, urgent, angry. Someone shouted for the tranquilizer team. Another yelled his name, begging him to step back. But all of that faded to background noise as Evan knelt at the edge of the wire coil. His heart hammered so loudly it blended with the lion's strained breathing. Rex's paw, mangled, swollen, pinned painfully in the barbs, twitched with each ragged breath the animal drew. Blood trickled down the lion's pads, trailing through the sand in thin streams. For a moment, Rex pulled against the wire again, a desperate, instinctive jerk. The metal bit deeper. Evan winced at the sight. "Easy," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "You're hurting yourself worse. Just hang on, big guy. Let me look." The wind carried his voice only a few feet, but he could tell Rex heard by the slight flick of the lion's ear, the faint shift of weight as the great animal tried to brace himself. Evan leaned in just enough to examine the twist of wire. It was tightened from multiple angles, the result of Rex's earlier struggle. Removing it would take time, and time was the one thing Rex no longer had. A sudden clatter behind Evan made Rex jerk his head up, and he let out a deep, guttural growl that rolled through the dirt and up Evan's spine. The sound was primal, ancient, one of nature's oldest warnings. Evan didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the lion, speaking again in that steady, grounded tone. I know. You don't want anyone close, I get it. But I'm not here to hurt you." For a moment, Rex held completely still, his eyes locked on Evan's face. The tension between them felt like a tight rope pulled from end to end. Fragile, dangerous, but somehow holding. A few yards away, Maya Benson lifted her camera, breath caught in her chest. She watched through the viewfinder as Evan pressed his knee into the dirt, inching close enough that the heat from Rex's breath brushed against his forearm. The lens trembled slightly in Maya's hands as she captured the impossible scene. A man kneeling before a full-grown king of the plains, within striking distance, with no weapon, no barrier, no protection, but his own steady calm. Evan reached forward 1 inch, then another. His fingers brushed the first loop of wire. Rex's pupils narrowed. His whiskers trembled. The lion's massive head lowered, muscles quivering with the instinct to flee or fight. but he did neither. He simply stared. Even in the chaos of the moment, Evan noticed something odd. Rex wasn't baring his teeth. He wasn't flattening his ears or drawing back his lips. The signs of imminent attack weren't there. Instead, the lion's breathing slowed ever so slightly, like he'd recognized something familiar in Evan's calmness. A quiet passed between them that didn't feel like silence at all. It felt like recognition. Then, with a suddenness that made Maya gasp aloud, Rex shifted his weight. A reflexive move, not an attack. The trapped paw tugged and Rex let out a sound that cut straight through Evan. A rumbling cry, low and wounded. Something between a growl and a plea. Evan instinctively moved closer, placing his body between Rex and the tangled metal, shielding him from the line of fire of the tranquilizer rifles he knew were aimed at them both. "Hold on, buddy," he said softly. "Let's get you out of this." As Evan bent lower, his arm grazed a sharp barb hidden beneath the sand. It sliced through the skin of his forearm, leaving a thin, stinging cut that bled immediately. He barely flinched. Maya saw it, zoomed in, her breath hitching. Evan's blood dripped into the dirt, mixing with the lion's in tiny crimson droplets. And still, he continued. He pulled at one loop of wire, working slowly, methodically, careful not to jerk or twist. Rex watched, his breath brushing against Evan's knuckles. The lion's body trembled with every tug, but he didn't recoil. His enormous head hovered only inches from Evan's shoulder, close enough that Evan could feel the faint warmth radiating through his shirt. Behind them, someone whispered, "He's gonna die. He's really gonna die." Another voice rose, trembling with panic. "Evan, for God's sake, get back!" But Evan didn't move. He barely blinked. When Rex gave another labored exhale, something flickered in his gaze. Something softer, almost searching. As if the lion was trying to understand why this human wasn't running, why he wasn't pointing a dart gun, why he wasn't shouting or brandishing a pole, why he was simply there. The wire resisted stubbornly, gripping the lion's paw like a trap, but Evan kept talking, soothing, steady. "I know you're scared. I know it hurts. Stay with me. Just a little more." His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from adrenaline pounding through his veins. Each breath he drew tasted like dust and metal. Rex's great head lowered again, the tip of his mane brushing Evan's wrist. The lion's nostrils flared lightly as if registering Evan's scent. Blood, sweat, and something else. Something calm. Evan didn't know why, but the lion's proximity didn't terrify him. Something deep inside him, a place shaped by years of trauma and survival, recognized the look in Rex's eyes. Pain. Fear. That feeling of being trapped, with no control. And in a strange, unspoken way, it felt like Rex recognized the same thing in him. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. The shouting staff, the clicking camera, the trembling ground. It was just man and lion, two battered spirits caught in the same storm, looking at each other without walls or expectations. Evan felt something shift in the air, like the first breath before a long-awaited rain. But the spell broke when Rex jerked instinctively at another wave of pain. His body tensed with primal power. Evan steadied himself, raising a hand slightly. "Easy. Easy. I'm right here." Rex didn't snap, didn't lunge. He merely panted heavily, eyes softening as he lifted his paw as much as he could, almost as if offering it to Evan, trusting him to do something no one else dared. The crowd behind them fell utterly silent. And in that silence, Evan knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just luck. Something was happening between them. Something rare. Something impossible to name. He leaned in closer, breath slowing to match the rhythm of Rex's, and reached again for the twisted coil, this time with a determination that bordered on reckless devotion. Whatever happened next, he was no longer afraid. He was committed. And Rex, against every law of the wild, seemed to understand. Evan tightened his grip on the wire, drawing a slow breath as he forced himself to focus. The world around him shimmered in the heat, voices distant, wind fading, everything blurring except the lion before him. Rex's paw trembled as Evan worked one strand loose, the metal scraping against itself with a harsh metallic grind. The sound made the lion flinch, and his massive shoulder rolled with a grunt of pain. Evan steadied him with nothing more than a quiet whisper. "I know it hurts. Stay with me, buddy. I'm right here." The lion's breath fanned across his arm, warm and uneven. But as Evan bent closer, something inside him shifted, an old ache rising from a place he rarely visited. The way Rex fought against the wire, desperate and scared, struck a chord that reached back through years of buried memories. Suddenly, he wasn't on the reserve anymore. He was 16, standing in a dim hallway of his childhood home, hearing the crash of bottles and the slurred rage of his father echoing off the walls. The sound of something breaking. The choked whimper Evan had been too small to stop. The helplessness. The guilt. The fear that made him shrink into shadows he didn't want to remember. He blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. The lion's pain-filled eyes anchored him, grounding him in the now. Rex wasn't his father. Rex wasn't anger. He was simply hurting, trapped, terrified, just like Evan had once been. He tightened his jaw and leaned closer. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered, and he meant it. With a practiced hand, he tucked his fingers under the next loop of barbed wire and twisted with care. The barb bit into his skin again, drawing another thin line of blood that smeared across the lion's fur. Rex's nostrils flared at the scent, and for a brief heartbeat, the world held still. Man and lion sharing the smell of blood and dust, two creatures marked by survival in different ways. A sudden gust of wind kicked sand across Evan's cheek as someone behind him shouted, "Evan, he's going to snap! You need to get back!" But Evan didn't turn. The fear in their voices only reminded him how alone Rex was in this moment, how the entire world saw the lion as a threat, a ticking bomb of muscle and instinct. But Evan didn't see that. He saw a creature fighting to stay alive, straining against pain that had no voice beyond a growl. He had seen hopeless eyes before, shaking hands, trembling breaths, the look of a soul backed into a corner. He knew that look too well. A fragment of Jack Ryland's voice echoed through his mind. "When an animal's in pain, boy, fear makes them dangerous. But calm can save lives. Theirs and yours. Calm." Evan exhaled slowly. His hands steadied. He remembered the first time he met Jack, how the older man had found him sitting behind a dumpster, behind a convenience store, clutching a bruised arm and trying to hide tears he didn't want anyone to see. Jack didn't ask questions. He simply sat down beside him until the tremors stopped. Later, he gave Evan his first volunteer job helping injured wildlife. "They don't judge your past," Jack had said. "They don't care where you've been, just who you are with them right now." Rex let out a tired rumble that vibrated through the ground. Evan leaned closer still, letting that memory guide him. "You're doing good," he murmured. "Just hold on." Another strand of wire loosened. The lion's paw dropped slightly, and Rex winced but did not strike. His muscles quivered, but he held his ground. His eyes, still locked on Evan, held a strange softness, a raw understanding that shouldn't have been possible between predator and human. Behind them, footsteps shuffled in the gravel. "We've got the tranquilizer ready," someone yelled. 3 minutes out." 3 minutes is too long," Evan answered without looking back. "He won't last that long without hurting himself worse." Rex shifted his weight suddenly, and Evan instinctively reached out, placing a hand against the lion's shoulder to steady him. The heat under his palm pulsed with tension, with life, with fear. Rex didn't snap. He didn't growl. He simply leaned ever so slightly into the touch before his trembling intensified. Evan swallowed a tight breath. "It's okay. You're okay." But even as he said it, he felt the lie in his chest. Rex wasn't okay. Neither was Evan. Not completely. They were both creatures shaped by scars, by old wounds that had never truly healed. But maybe, in this impossible moment, they were exactly what the other needed. He bent over the final knot of wire, twisting it free from the mangled fur. The last strand was the deepest, cutting into the pad where Rex had no way to pull without harming himself. Evan steadied his hands. "One more," he whispered. "Stay with me." Rex exhaled slowly, a hot breath brushing against the back of Evan's neck. The lion's whiskers touched his sleeve as he lowered his head, the proximity almost unbearable in its intensity. Evan felt his pulse spike, not in fear, but in awe. It felt as if Rex was trying to understand him, trying to read the intention behind every movement. With a final push, the last barb pulled loose. Rex flinched hard, jerking his paw out of the wire with a pained grunt that echoed through the dry air. Evan stumbled back onto one knee, but didn't retreat further. The lion lifted his paw, blood dripping from the torn pad, and stared at the freed limb as though unsure what to do with it. Then Rex's gaze lifted back to Evan, steady, piercing, strangely calm. For a breathless moment, they simply looked at each other. Two souls battered by life, wrapped in different kinds of cages, now sharing one small victory in the dust. Evan felt the world tilt around him, but Rex didn't move, didn't threaten, didn't lash out. Instead, the lion lowered his head and waited. The wind stilled, the voices behind them faded, and in that fragile space of quiet, Evan realized something he had not understood until now. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the beginning of something neither of them had words for. For a suspended heartbeat, Evan stayed kneeling in the dirt, panting softly as the final piece of wire fell from his hand. The world seemed to hold its breath along with him. The sun dipped lower behind the ridge, painting a faint halo around Rex's massive silhouette. The lion's freed paw hovered uncertainly above the ground, trembling from shock and pain. Blood matted the thick fur along his leg, darkening into a rusty sheen beneath the fading light. Every instinct in Evan's body screamed at him to pull back, to put distance between himself and the apex predator now no longer restrained by anything. But he didn't move. Something deeper kept him rooted in place, a quiet understanding that running now would shatter the fragile thread they had both clung to. Rex shifted his weight, muscles rippling beneath his wounded frame. A low rumble welled up from his chest. Not the violent roar of earlier, but a sound heavy with fatigue. He took a hesitant step, testing the freed paw, wincing slightly as it touched the earth. Evan swallowed hard, not daring to blink. The entire reserve around them fell into utter silence. No shouts, no scrambling boots, no clicking cameras. Even the breeze seemed to hush. Then, without any warning, Rex closed the distance between them. The lion moved slower than any lion should have. Soft, deliberate, each step measured like a decision being made in real time. Evan's heart hammered against his ribs, his pulse so loud he could hear it in his ears. He felt the ground tremble as the great animal approached. Sand shifted beneath Rex's weight, the faint crunching the only sound for a long stretch of seconds. Evan inhaled, trying to steady his breath, but fear and astonishment tangled together in a knot he couldn't loosen. Rex stopped directly in front of him. The lion's head lowered, mane brushing against Evan's shoulder with a texture like coarse, sun-warmed straw. The closeness was overwhelming, his scent, earthy and heavy, filling the space between them. Evan tried to make himself still, though every instinct in his body warred between awe and survival. Rex's whiskers grazed Evan's jaw. The lion's eyes, deep and amber, locked onto his with an intensity that made time feel unreal. Then it happened. Rex leaned in and gently pressed his forehead against Evan's shoulder. It was barely a touch, soft, fleeting, but it hit Evan with the force of something ancient and sacred. This was no act of dominance, no threat, no warning. It felt like acknowledgement, a gesture so impossibly gentle it rooted him to the earth. Evan's breath caught in his throat. His vision blurred for a moment, his eyes stinging unexpectedly. He could feel the warmth of Rex's breath against his neck, steady and slow. Their shadows merged under the lowering sun, blending into one shape that no one at the reserve had ever seen before. Behind them, someone gasped. Another choked back a cry. The tranquilizer team lowered their rifles almost by instinct. Confusion etched across their faces. They had prepared for chaos, for violence, for tragedy. Not for this. Maya Benson, who'd been filming from a distance, felt her hands shake as she captured the moment. Her lens trembled slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had documented wildlife for over a decade. Lions hunting, lions snarling, lions protecting their young. But she had never, ever seen a lion show gentleness to a human in a moment like this. Rex held the contact for a breath, then another, as though grounding himself in the presence of someone he had come to trust in the middle of unbearable fear. Evan slowly raised his hand, the movement deliberate, cautious. He didn't touch Rex, he didn't dare, but the lion's eyes flicked to the gesture as though recognizing the care in it. For a brief heartbeat, it looked like Rex almost leaned into his steadying presence, as though finding comfort in it. Finally, Rex pulled back just slightly. His head lifted, mane brushing across Evan's cheek. His breath washed over him in a warm exhale. And then, with quiet dignity, the lion turned away. His injured paw hung just a little off the ground, but it supported him enough to take slow, measured steps toward the open field beyond the fence line. His tail flicked once, a low, deliberate sweep of fur through the air. Evan stayed kneeling, unable to move, unable to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. Dust swirled around him, kicked up by Rex's retreating footsteps. The tension that had coiled around the reserve for the last several minutes dissipated like mist burned off by the sun. Slowly, sound returned. The distant call of a hawk, the shuffle of boots, the soft click of Maya's camera as she captured Rex's slow walk into the grass. Then chaos erupted. Voices shouted. People rushed toward him. A hand gripped his shoulder, pulling him up. Another reached for his arm. Someone's voice trembled. "Evan, are you okay? Can you hear me?" But Evan barely registered the words. He kept staring at the path Rex had taken, as if expecting the lion to glance back. His own blood still trickled from the cut on his forearm, stinging as it dried in the warm air. Sweat dampened his collar. But he felt strangely light, as though a weight he hadn't known he carried had been lifted. Tom's voice broke through the noise. "What were you thinking?" he barked, though the tremor in his tone betrayed just as much shock as anger. "He could have taken your head off." Evan swallowed, trying to find words, but none came. Not yet. Dr. Hannah Boyd inspected his arm with trembling hands, muttering under her breath about protocols and liability. Maya hovered near them, her eyes still wide, the camera dangling forgotten at her side. But Evan's mind wasn't with them. It was still out there, in the open wild, following the slow path of a wounded lion who had chosen not to hurt him when he had every reason and every instinct to do so. He finally spoke, voice hoarse. We need to treat his paw. There's still a deep barb in it." Tom stared at him in disbelief. "We'll get to that. But you—" Evan shook his head before Tom could finish, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He'll come back. He knows he needs help." Hannah looked at him sharply. confusion pulling at her features. "Evan, lions don't reason like that." Evan didn't argue. He simply repeated, softer this time. "He knows." As the team escorted him away from the fence, Evan looked one last time toward the tall grass. And there, just barely visible in the wavering light, Rex was watching him, head low, injured paw lifted, eyes fixed in a way that made Evan's heartbeat stutter. A silent promise passed between them. A promise no one else understood. Not yet. Evan didn't know how, but he knew this moment wasn't the end. It was the opening note of something extraordinary, something that defied everything taught in textbooks and training manuals. The bond had begun, and neither of them were the same anymore. By the time Evan reached the medical wing, the adrenaline had drained from his body, leaving him shaky and unsteady on his feet. The hallways of Silver Mesa's main facility buzzed with tension, voices low, clipped, urgent. Word of what had happened at the southern fence had already traveled faster than he had. Staff members stopped mid-step as he passed, their eyes flicking from his dusty clothes to the blood streaked along his arm. Some looked horrified. Some looked amazed. Others looked like they weren't sure which they should be. Tom marched beside him, jaw tight, fists clenched. "I ought to suspend you right now," he muttered, barely containing the tremor in his voice. "What you did out there, that was reckless beyond measure." Evan didn't respond. He wasn't ignoring Tom. He simply didn't have the energy to explain something he didn't yet understand himself. The moment with Rex still clung to him, heavy and impossible to describe. It had carved a mark deeper than any reprimand could touch. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of antiseptic and fresh bandages. Equipment hummed, and the overhead lights cast a sterile glow across the treatment bay. Rex lay sedated behind reinforced glass in a recovery enclosure, his chest rising and falling slowly. A ventilator tube pulsed rhythmically beside him. His paw was bandaged loosely, but one deep barb still remained embedded in the pad, too difficult to remove without full sedation. Dr. Hannah Boyd stood at the control panel, reviewing his vitals. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "Temperature is elevated but stable. Blood pressure's high. Sedation level holding." She paused, glancing over as Evan stepped into the observation room. "We'll need to remove the remaining barb once the second dose settles." Tom crossed his arms tightly. "And Miller stays on the opposite side of this glass, at all times. Understood?" Hannah hesitated. Her gaze flicked toward Evan, as if she wasn't completely convinced that keeping him away was the safest idea. But she nodded anyway. Rules were rules, and those rules didn't bend easily in a place where one mistake could cost a life. Evan approached the observation window slowly. His breath caught as he saw Rex lying on the padded floor. Even sedated, the lion looked massive, powerful, terrifying in theory. But not to Evan, not in this strange, quiet moment. The rise and fall of his chest was steady, but there was a subtle tension in the lion's posture, like his body was waiting for something, even in sleep. Hannah cleared her throat softly. "You should sit. You're bleeding." She pointed to the cut on his arm. He glanced down and realized only then how much blood had dried into his skin and shirt. The sting returned as adrenaline faded. "It's fine," he murmured. But Hannah's look silenced him. She gently steered him to a chair and retrieved a first aid kit, cleaning the wound carefully. As she wrapped gauze around his arm, she said quietly, "Evan, you got closer than anyone I've ever seen without getting hurt." She paused. "Or hurting the lion." Her voice dipped lower. "That doesn't happen. Not with a lion in that much pain." Evan stared at the window. "He wasn't trying to hurt me. That's the part I can't understand." Hannah tied off the bandage and sat back. He should have been confused, aggressive, unpredictable at best. But what you described, what we saw, her words trailed off as she shook her head. It doesn't fit any known behavioral model. A soft shuffle echoed from behind the glass. Rex, still under sedation, shifted slightly on the padded floor. His head twitched, his ears flicking as if sensing something. Hannah frowned. He shouldn't be stirring yet. She tapped the monitor. Vitals stable, sedation adequate, nothing abnormal. Then Rex turned his head toward the observation window. Very slowly. Deliberately. Evan's breath froze. Rex's amber eyes, though fogged with medication, opened and focused straight toward Evan. Not toward the monitors. Not toward Hannah or Tom standing closer. But toward Evan, standing several feet back, partially in shadow. A low, muffled sound escaped Rex's throat. A weak, breathy rumble. More like the soft call a lion might give when trying to locate one of its own. Tom cursed under his breath. No, that's not. He can't see through that. It's mirrored glass. Hannah stared, stunned. He shouldn't even be conscious enough to recognize movement. But Evan felt the truth settle through him like something ancient. Rex wasn't reacting to the sight of him. He was reacting to the presence of him. Evan stepped closer to the glass. Rex responded instantly, lifting his head a little more, eyes sharpening despite the medication. His injured paw twitched. He let out another soft sound, a quieter rumble that vibrated faintly through the reinforced frame. A whispering murmur rose in the room. Maya, arriving breathless with her camera still slung over her shoulder, froze when she saw the way Rex watched Evan. She raised her lens, but this time her hands shook from something more than shock. She was witnessing history, and she knew it. Evan laid a hand against the glass. Rex tried to lift his paw toward him. The sedation pulled him down again before he could finish the gesture. The lion's head lowered to the padding, his eyes closing, but not before giving Evan one last, lingering look. A look that said he recognized him, trusted him, needed him. Hannah finally exhaled. That is not possible. Tom rubbed his forehead with both hands. Miller, I don't know what you did out there today, but you've thrown every protocol we have into chaos. Evan didn't respond. His throat felt tight, his heart too full. All he could see was the moment Rex tried to lift his paw, toward him, not away. Tom stepped closer, voice low but unsteady. You violated the rules. You broke procedure. You put everyone at risk. He paused, then added with disbelief still thick in his tone. And for some reason I can't explain. The lion didn't punish you for it. Evan swallowed. He wasn't going to. No, Tom snapped. He wasn't. And that's the problem. He turned toward Hannah, frustration written all over him. What are we supposed to do with this? With him? His gesture included Evan and the lion alike. For once, Hannah didn't offer an answer, because none of them had one. Not yet. Before anyone could speak again, Rex stirred once more, his tail shifting sluggishly across the floor. The sight drew all eyes back to the observation window. Evan felt a chill crawl through him. Not fear, but something heavier. Something that felt like destiny pulling at both ends of a thread. Rex was waiting. Even sedated, even wounded, even surrounded by strangers and noise and bright sterile lights. He was waiting for Evan. And that truth broke every rule the world thought it knew about lions. But it was only the beginning. By sunrise the next morning, Silver Mesa was no longer a quiet wildlife reserve. It felt like a pressure cooker with the lid rattling from every direction. Researchers arguing in hushed tones, administration pacing hallways, volunteers whispering about what they'd seen. Even the animals seemed restless, their calls echoing sharply across the compound as if sensing the tension. The encounter between Evan and Rex had rippled through the reserve like a shockwave. No one knew what to make of it. and the silence of unanswered questions only magnified the unease. Tom summoned an emergency meeting before dawn. Evan sat near the end of the long conference table, his arm still bandaged, his eyes heavy from a night without sleep. Across from him, Maya hovered with her laptop open, replaying the footage she captured. Every time the video looped, the moment Rex turned toward Evan behind the one-way glass, the soft rumble, the attempted lift of his paw, the room shifted like someone had thrown a stone into still water. Hannah stood near the monitor, arms crossed tightly, her expression caught between disbelief and scientific curiosity. Tom exhaled sharply and finally said what everyone was thinking. "We have a situation on our hands, and pretending it's ordinary would be irresponsible." He glanced at Evan. "We can't ignore what happened yesterday, but we can't let optimism cloud judgment either." Dr. Alicia Crow, head of behavioral biology research, entered late, hair pulled back, glasses slightly askew as if she hadn't slept either. She placed a folder on the table. "I've read the incident report, twice." Her voice held both disbelief and intrigue. A distressed male lion, fully conscious and in pain, displaying non-aggressive, intentional, and possibly imitative behavior toward a human? That alone is unprecedented. Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. "So what are you suggesting? That this is... what? Friendship?" "No," Alicia said firmly. "But something happened, and until we find out what, we're responsible for documenting it under controlled conditions." Her gaze swept to Evan. "Whether we like it or not, Mr. Miller appears to be the trigger." Evan shifted in his chair, uneasy with the attention. "I didn't trigger anything," he said quietly. He was scared, in pain. You approached a lion in full panic without sedation," Tom cut in. "That alone is outside every protocol we have." "And yet he didn't hurt him," Maya said, clicking to the frame where Rex rested his head against Evan's shoulder. The image froze on screen, radiating an almost surreal tenderness. Her voice softened. "This wasn't misinterpretation. It wasn't a fluke. Something passed between them." "That's what worries me," Tom muttered. The group fell silent. After several moments, Alicia spoke again. "We need a controlled observation. Let's place Evan where Rex can see him from a safe distance and document the lion's reactions." She lifted a hand to stop Tom's protest. "Upon my authority as head of behavior research, I say this is not optional. It's necessary." Tom reluctantly nodded. "Fine, but if anything goes even slightly off, the experiment stops. Immediately." The team assembled quickly. A reinforced viewing corridor was set up beside the medical enclosure, separated by thick, transparent barrier walls designed to withstand anything a lion could throw at them. High-resolution cameras were installed, along with audio sensors to record any vocalizations Rex made. Monitors displayed his vitals, respiration, heart rate, temperature. The sedation used the night before was tapered off carefully under Hannah's supervision. Evan stepped into the viewing room with hesitation, a knot tightening in his stomach as he saw Rex lying on the padded floor. The lion was more alert now, though still groggy, his eyelids heavy, his ears twitching as the staff moved around. His bandaged paw rested unevenly, free of the barbed wire but still angry and swollen. For a moment, Evan wondered if Rex would even notice him. Maybe yesterday had been a fluke, a moment driven by exhaustion and pain, nothing more. Then Rex lifted his head. His gaze swept the enclosure slowly. His breathing hitched. His nostrils flared. The moment he saw Evan through the transparent barrier, something changed in the lion's posture. His ears angled forward, his heavy tail shifted across the floor. His entire body straightened with a sudden, unmistakable alertness. Hannah whispered, "Oh my God." Rex stood, weakly at first, then with more conviction, and limped toward the barrier. Not toward the feeding platform, not toward the medical staff, not toward the view of the savannah painted in light behind him. Toward Evan. Evan froze, heart pounding. He dared not step forward, not wanting to influence anything. But Rex kept coming until he stood just inches from the barrier, his breath fogging the transparent surface. The lion lowered himself with visible effort, easing into a position that mirrored exactly the stance Evan had been in the day before. Kneeling, weight shifted to one side, injured paw extended gently forward. The room behind Evan erupted with gasps. "Is he mimicking?" Maya breathed, camera trembling in her grip. Alicia leaned so close to the barrier, her breath misted it. Animals imitate within their social structure. Cubs copy adults. Members of a pride copy each other. But cross-species imitation, intentional imitation, she shook her head, speechless. "I have never seen anything like this." Rex remained perfectly still, eyes fixed on Evan in a quiet, almost reverent way. There was no aggression, no warning posture, no sign of stress. His breathing calmed. His tail moved in a slow, deliberate arc across the floor. Nothing like the agitated whipping of fear or dominance. This was something else entirely. Something softer. Something aware. Evan swallowed. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, voice barely louder than a breath. "It's okay." Rex responded with a sound so unexpected that everyone in the viewing room stiffened. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a soft, chuff-like exhale. The same sound large cats sometimes make toward trusted companions or cubs. The sound vibrated through the glass and into Evan's chest like a low, soothing hum. Tom stumbled forward, stunned. "Get that on every camera," he said hoarsely. Maya was already recording. Hannah blinked rapidly, unable to hide the astonishment washing over her. This is impossible." Evan felt something inside him loosen, a tension he didn't realize he'd been holding. The connection from yesterday hadn't evaporated with sedation or time. It was still here, alive and undeniable. He knelt slowly, matching Rex's posture. The lion's eyes softened, and he gave another quiet chuff, leaning forward until his forehead brushed the barrier, resting there with a gentle weight that sent a shiver through the room. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth. Alicia's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. This was no trick of instinct, no misinterpretation, no random behavior. This was recognition. And now, with the cameras rolling and half the staff watching in stunned silence, the world outside Silver Mesa would soon see it too. Rex had remembered the man who helped him. He had recognized his presence, and he had chosen trust over fear. The impossible wasn't coming. It was already happening, on the other side of a thin sheet of glass, and nothing in their world would ever be the same again. By midday, the footage of Rex pressing his forehead to the barrier had already been replayed dozens of times inside Silver Mesa. Word traveled faster than anyone wanted. Whispers spread among staff, then through volunteers, and eventually to the administrative offices where decisions were made far above Evan's pay grade. The reserve felt different now, like every set of eyes carried a question, and every hallway held its breath, waiting for someone to say what no one dared admit out loud. In the boardroom, the air was thick with tension. Evan sat at the far end of the long wooden table, shoulders tight, hands clasped between his knees. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork, a sterile contrast to the raw, wild truth unfolding just outside. Tom stood near the window, pacing in short, frustrated strides. Across from him sat Mark Garrison, a senior board member whose expression had hardened into a mask of caution the moment he arrived. Hannah sat near the center, her face drawn, her arms crossed protectively. Alicia rested her hands calmly on a stack of notes, her eyes bright with cautious wonder. Maya entered and took her seat, setting her camera gently on the table. She glanced at Evan with a silent reassurance. She knew what he'd seen, what he'd felt. But that didn't mean she had the power to defend it. Tom cleared his throat sharply. We are here because, frankly, we don't know what we're dealing with. He tapped a pen against the table, rhythm quick with agitation. This isn't normal lion behavior. It isn't even close. His eyes swept the room. We need a plan. Mark leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. A plan? Yes. Step 1. Keep that man, he nodded in Evan's direction, away from that lion. Evan stiffened, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Mark continued, his tone stern. What I saw on those cameras wasn't a bond. It was confusion, instability. The lion is imprinting on a human. That could be dangerous for everyone involved. Alicia lifted her chin. Or it could be groundbreaking, she said softly. We've documented cross-species recognition before, but never like this. Never with a predator under extreme stress. She tapped the table gently. That lion saw him, not as prey, not as threat, as something. Something dangerous, Mark shot back. A lion that misunderstands its relationship with humans is a liability. Maya bristled. A liability? Rex is traumatized. He spent years in captivity. Of course, his behaviors aren't typical. And now, Mark countered, he seems to think one particular man is part of his world. His gaze settled on Evan with uneasy intensity. That is not a gift, Ms. Benson. That is a problem. Tom sighed, rubbing his temples. We need to focus. Rex will be ready for reintroduction as soon as his paw heals. But yesterday changed everything. He looked at Evan. If the lion reacts unpredictably because of this connection, it could compromise the entire process. Evan finally spoke, his voice even. Rex wasn't reacting unpredictably. He was reacting with intent. He paused, picking his words carefully. I know what it looks like from the outside. But he wasn't confused. He was scared. He was hurting. And he trusted the only person he saw trying to help him. That's exactly my point, Mark said sharply. He trusts you, too much. Enough to put other staff at risk if he seeks you out instead of adapting to his environment. Hannah shifted uneasily. We can't ignore the facts. Rex's heart rate stabilized when Evan appeared. His posture relaxed. His vocalizations changed. She looked between the board members. These aren't signs of distress. They're signs of recognition. Mark scoffed. Recognition? You make it sound human. Alicia answered before Hannah could. We're not claiming it's human. We're saying it's meaningful. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the decision hung over them all, whether to treat Rex's behavior as a scientific breakthrough or a dangerous flaw. Tom finally asked the question everyone had been circling. So what happens when Rex is released? If he seeks out Evan again, what then? What if it happens in open terrain? Evan breathed in slowly. Then I'll do what I've always done, he said quietly. Stay calm. Keep distance. Respect the boundary. Mark slammed his palm against the table. You can't reason with a lion, Miller. Maybe not. Evan met his gaze steadily. But I can respect him. And he respects that. That's why I'm still alive. The room fell silent again. A soft knock broke the tension. A junior tech peeked in, whispering urgently to Hannah. She stood immediately, eyes widening. Rex is awake, she said. And he's looking for him. All chairs scraped back at once. They hurried down the hallway to the observation area, tension growing with each step. When they reached the transparent enclosure, the sight waiting for them stopped them in their tracks. Rex was standing, fully alert, despite sedation still coursing through him. His injured paw hovered just slightly above the ground, but he was steady, composed. His massive head swung toward the glass. The moment he saw Evan, he stepped closer. Not toward the food tray, not toward Hannah, not toward the open space behind him, straight to Evan. He pressed the side of his head gently against the glass. A soft vibration traveled into the room, the same quiet chuff that had stunned them all before. Mark swore under his breath, unable to deny what he saw. Hannah covered her mouth with one hand. Maya raised her camera, her fingers trembling. Evan exhaled slowly, lifting his hand to the glass. "Hey," he whispered. "I'm here." Rex stilled, then lowered himself, again mirroring Evan's height. Behind them, Tom ran a shaky hand across his face. "We can't stop this," he whispered. "We can't pretend it's not happening." Alicia nodded. "Then we document it. Every second. Every interaction. This could redefine what we know about predator cognition." Mark shook his head, unwilling to let go. "Or it could get someone killed." Evan looked back at Rex, then at the team. "He's not confused," he said softly. "He's choosing this." As the lion chuffed once more, a steady, low sound of recognition, everyone in the room realized the truth. The danger wasn't in the connection. The danger was in denying it. And for the first time since the rescue, fear didn't come from the lion. It came from the people who didn't understand him. The morning Rex was scheduled for reintroduction began with an eerie stillness. The desert sky over Silver Mesa glowed in pale shades of peach and lavender, the early dawn casting long shadows across the reserve. The cool air carried a faint smell of damp soil and sagebrush, a temporary quiet before the day's heat and tension settled in. But inside the compound, nothing felt calm. Doors opened and closed, radios crackled, staff spoke in clipped sentences, urgency strapped to every word. It was as if the entire reserve knew something impossible was about to be tested. Evan stood beside the reinforced transport vehicle, feeling the metal vibrate from the engine's idle hum. He was dressed in standard field gear, but there was nothing standard about the situation. Tom approached with a clipboard in hand, the lines in his face deeper than usual. This wasn't just a transfer. This was an unpredictable event wrapped in the thin hope that everything they'd seen these last days meant something more than instinct. "Remember the rules," Tom said, voice low, firm, but not unkind. "You stay inside the vehicle. You don't get out unless we tell you. The sedation team is in place. Vets are standing by, and at the first sign of aggression—" "I know," Evan finished quietly. Though his voice was steady, something inside him twisted. "I won't break protocol today." Tom hesitated, searching his expression. "We can't risk your safety, Evan. You understand that." "I understand," he repeated, but his tone held a weight he couldn't mask. Hannah arrived next, tablet in hand, her expression torn between scientific excitement and human worry. "He's physically ready," she said. "The wound is healing, heart rate normal, behavior—" "Well, that's the part we still can't predict." She paused, lowering her voice. "Just be ready for anything." Maya came last, camera strapped securely across her chest. She looked at Evan with a seriousness he rarely saw in her. "Today will define everything," she said softly. "Whatever happens out there, it becomes the story." Evan nodded, but his gaze drifted to the transport crate sitting a short distance away, framed by armed staff and tranquilizer specialists. The crate was large, sturdy, lined with padding. Inside, Rex waited. The moment the doors opened, a deep, resonant vibration traveled through the ground. It wasn't a roar. It was the low sound a lion makes when waking from sedation, confused, alert, reaching for familiarity. Evan felt it in his ribs, a pulsing reminder of the connection neither of them could name. Rex stepped into view. Even injured, even groggy, he was breathtaking, a creature built by the wild itself. His mane caught the rising sunlight, glowing like a crown of amber threads. His injured paw hovered just slightly off the ground, careful but functional. Every muscle beneath his coat moved with controlled intention. Then his head turned. He looked straight toward the transport vehicle, not toward the open plains waiting behind him, not toward the staff forming a wide semicircle, not toward the exit gate, toward Evan. Through tinted glass, through the early morning haze, through noise, distance, and logic, straight to him. The staff murmured. Radios hissed. Even the tranquilizer team adjusted their aim instinctively, uncertain whether the lion's focus signaled threat or something else entirely. Rex began to move, each step slow but deliberate. "Hold your positions," Tom shouted. "Do not fire unless ordered." The lion's gaze didn't waver as he crossed the dirt clearing. Evan's breath stilled in his chest, a familiar mix of awe and fear washing over him. He could feel something rising inside him, a pull, a recognition, the same unspoken thread that had bound them since the first moment Rex looked into his eyes at the fence. Inside the vehicle, the air felt too tight. Evan pressed a hand to the window. Rex continued forward. "That's far enough," Mark said from the command booth, voice trembling with dread. "If he gets any closer," Tom cut him off. "We wait." Rex stopped only when he reached a point about 50 feet from the vehicle. He sat, not in a hunting stance, not tensed for attack, but calmly, watching, waiting. "He knows you're in there," Hannah whispered, astonished. "He can't see through the tint," Maya said. "He shouldn't be able to smell you with the wind like this." "But he knows," Alicia murmured, almost reverently. "He's seeking him." That moment split the world in two, before and after. Inside the vehicle, Evan's pulse raced. Every instinct told him to stay put, to follow orders, to trust the team. But another voice rose inside him, something quieter yet far more powerful. Trust goes both ways. Rex lifted his uninjured paw slightly, shifting his weight with visible effort. The gesture wasn't threatening. It held the same hesitance Rex had shown through the glass, the same silent question. Evan reached for the door handle. The radio exploded with voices. "Evan, don't you dare! Stay inside the vehicle! This is not protocol! Miller, stand down! That's an order!" But fear didn't come from the lion, and trust didn't come from protocol. Evan opened the door. The world gasped. He stepped out slowly, the crunch of dirt under his boots the only sound in the clearing. The air thickened. Every rifle tightened its aim. Every heartbeat in the clearing became a countdown. Evan took 3 steps forward. Rex didn't move. He simply watched, amber eyes glowing with something impossibly steady, something that demanded no explanation. Evan stopped at a safe distance. His breath trembled. "I'm here," he said softly. The words carried through the still air as though the desert itself was listening. For a long moment, neither man nor lion moved. The space between them felt alive, charged with something ancient and gentle, something far beyond the control of any human watching. Then Rex inhaled deeply, lowered his head, and rose to his feet again. Slow, certain, trusting. He began to walk toward Evan. Tom whispered into the radio, voice cracking, "Hold your fire. Hold." Evan exhaled, steadying himself. Whatever happened next would define the truth forever. About Rex, about instinct, about connection, about courage. It was the moment everything in their story had been leading toward. And Rex was the one who decided to take the first step. The lion moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each stride carrying the weight of something far greater than instinct. The early morning light caught the edges of his mane, turning it into a rippling halo of gold that shimmered with every careful step he took. Dust lifted beneath his paws, swirling in the quiet air like whispered breath. Evan felt the earth shift with each movement, the vibrations crawling up through his boots and into his bones. But he didn't step back. He didn't brace to run. He didn't even lift his hands in defense. Instead, He held his ground and breathed deeply, letting the stillness inside him rise above the tremor building in his chest. Behind him, chaos gathered like a storm on the edge of the horizon. "Evan, stop!" Tom's voice broke, cracking under fear that felt too human, too raw. The tranquilizer team scrambled to adjust their rifles, eyes darting between Evan and the lion, unsure what order to follow. Hannah clutched her tablet to her chest, her knuckles white. Mark Garrison shook his head in disbelief, muttering over and over, "This is insane. This is reckless. He's going to get himself killed." But no one dared step closer. No one wanted to break the spell forming in the wide stretch of desert between man and lion. Rex slowed when he was a little more than 10 feet away, his breath visible in the cool morning air. His injured paw hovered slightly above the ground, but he bore his weight without collapsing, refusing to show weakness even now. His eyes, those amber, ancient eyes, locked onto Evan's with a clarity that made the world fall away. Evan felt something inside himself steady, like a flame sheltered from wind. He swallowed a dry breath. "It's okay," he murmured, voice quiet and unshaken. "I'm here." The lion's ears twitched at the sound. Rex lowered his head, drawing in Evan's scent carried faintly on the breeze. The trench of fear that should have existed between them simply wasn't there. Instead, the air felt familiar, as if they had stood like this before in another time, another place. As if some part of Rex recognized something deeper in Evan, something he couldn't articulate but instinctively trusted. Evan took a slow, almost imperceptible step forward, every gun cocked at once. "Hold your fire!" Tom roared, voice cracking. "Nobody fires unless I say so!" The order rang across the field, bouncing off the rocks and brush like a command carved into stone. Still, the tension didn't ease. It merely trembled, suspended between hope and terror. Rex inhaled, a rumble rising in his chest, not loud, not threatening, but deep enough to remind every human present what he was capable of. Still, the sound didn't send Evan running. It sent him closer. He closed the gap by another foot. Sand crunched under his boot, a soft sound swallowed immediately by the enormity of the moment. Rex's nostrils flared again. His tail flicked once, slow and deliberate, not in aggression, but awareness. Evan could now see the individual whiskers along the lion's muzzle, the small tremors in his injured leg, the tension in his shoulders from standing on 3 paws. He could see the scar beneath Rex's left eye, a faint remnant of the life he'd been rescued from. And he could see the softness, yes, softness, in the lion's gaze. Evan exhaled. "You're okay." Rex's massive frame shifted forward. The entire reserve inhaled sharply. The lion stopped only a few feet away now. Evan could feel the heat radiating off his coat. He could smell the earthy scent of dust and sun-warmed fur. The closeness wasn't just physical. It felt emotional, indescribable. Evan didn't move another inch. He let Rex decide what came next. The lion lifted his head, chest rising slowly. Then, with a gentleness so shocking it rippled through every witness like a shockwave, Rex lowered himself to the ground, mirroring the same kneeling posture Evan had taken the day he freed him. His injured paw extended slightly forward. His body relaxed, no longer coiled in tension, but settling into the earth in a gesture of peace, of surrender, of trust. A gasp rose from the staff. He's submitting," Maya whispered, her camera trembling. "No," Hannah corrected softly, awe breaking her voice. "He's communicating." Evan knelt too, mirroring Rex. Not out of strategy, but respect. Their eyes met at the same height. Rex gave a soft, quiet chuff, a sound so gentle it felt like a secret shared only between them. Evan felt the sound more than heard it, a warm vibration that settled somewhere deep in his chest. It was the same sound Rex had made through the observation glass, the same sound that had stunned the entire scientific team. But now, with nothing between them, that small expression felt sacred. Evan's eyes burned with tears he tried hard not to let fall. "You're okay," he whispered again. As if in answer, Rex leaned forward and, with a slow, deliberate movement, pressed his forehead against Evan's leg. A soft contact, a fleeting touch, a gesture that defied everything anyone had ever believed a lion capable of. Gasps, cries, and unsteady breaths filled the air behind Evan, but he barely heard any of it. He didn't need to. Time had folded around them. It was just Rex and him, two beings separated by species, bound by survival, now rewriting the rules of the world. Rex lingered for only a second, then pulled back with quiet grace. He lifted his head, looked at Evan one last time with those deep, burning amber eyes, and turned away. Not in fear, not in confusion, in trust, in understanding. He walked toward the open savanna, each step a declaration of freedom, leaving behind only the memory of a moment no one present would ever forget. Evan remained kneeling long after Rex disappeared into the tall grass. He could feel the tremors of awe radiating from the people behind him. He could feel their fear turning into something else: wonder, disbelief, reverence. He rose slowly, turning back to face them. Mark's face was pale. Hannah looked like she might cry. Maya lowered her camera with trembling hands. Tom stared in silence, unable to speak. But all Evan could say was, "He chose to trust. That's all this was." Tom exhaled, voice shaking. "No, Evan. That was more than trust." He looked toward the field where the lion had vanished. "That was something the world has never seen before." Evan followed the line of Tom's gaze, the horizon shimmering with morning light. Deep inside, he knew this wasn't the climax. This was the turning point. Rex had walked into the wild, but the story between them was far from over. For a long moment, Evan stayed exactly where the lion had left him, kneeling in the cool morning sand, heart still thundering with the echo of something he could hardly comprehend. The air felt thin around him, stretched tight with a kind of awe that didn't belong to ordinary life. Behind him, the world hummed back to motion, boots shifting, radios crackling, people whispering. But none of it touched the place inside him that was still kneeling in front of a wild lion who had shown him a gesture he would carry for the rest of his life. Slowly, Evan pushed himself to his feet. The breeze carried the warmth of the rising sun, brushing gently across his face as if trying to pull him back to earth. But his gaze remained fixed on the tall grass where Rex had disappeared, each blade still rustling faintly from the lion's path. Evan felt a hollow ache open in his chest. Not fear, not sadness, but something deeper. A bond had been formed in the dust and danger, and watching Rex walk away felt strangely like letting go of a piece of himself. Tom's voice finally broke through the silence. "Evan," he called softly, as though afraid to disturb the moment. "We need to debrief." Evan turned slowly. The entire team was staring at him, eyes wide, faces pale, expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and reverence. Mark Garrison looked shaken, as if everything he believed about wildlife behavior had been pulled out from under him. Hannah's eyes glistened, her breathing unsteady. Maya hadn't even lifted her camera. She stood frozen, hands limp at her sides, like she knew no lens could fully capture what they'd just witnessed. Tom stepped closer. You did something none of us expected," he said quietly. "Something I'm not sure I can even explain." Evan shook his head gently. "I didn't do anything. Rex did." Hannah approached next, her voice trembling. "That touch, That wasn't dominance behavior. It wasn't aggression. Evan, that was... She searched for a word, settling on the only one that fit. Recognition. Mark scoffed and immediately regretted it. The sound seemed too sharp, too small for the weight in the air. Recognition? Lions don't... But the rest of his sentence died on his tongue, drowned by the memory of what they had all seen. A lion lowering himself not to attack, not to threaten, but to acknowledge the man who freed him. Maya finally found her voice. That was something the world has never seen, she whispered. And I got every frame. Tom exhaled sharply. Let's get back to the vehicles. We need to process everything, and we need to make sure Rex is safe once he settles into his territory. They turned back toward the transport trucks, everyone stepping with the unsteady gait of people waking from a dream too real to dismiss. Evan followed, but the weight in his chest didn't budge. He stopped once more to glance over his shoulder. The field was empty, silent, the grass swaying gently in the morning light. But there was no fear in that emptiness. There was only promise. Back at the monitoring station, the screens flickered with live feeds from the far range where Rex had been released. Drones hovered at a respectful distance, programmed only to observe from afar without interfering. The terrain stretched out in golden waves, dotted with mesquite and sagebrush. Somewhere out there, Rex was reacquainting himself with open space, a freedom he'd lost for years. Evan leaned forward, eyes scanning the screens. He'll show himself when he's ready, Hannah said softly beside him. Lions need time to settle, especially after sedation. He's not just settling, Evan murmured. He's adjusting to being free again. Mark, still pale, crossed his arms. He's adjusting to something else, too. Your presence. And that concerns me more than anyone seems willing to admit. Maya looked up sharply. You think he's dangerous? I think he's unpredictable, Mark replied. And unpredictability is exactly how people get hurt. Tom rubbed his temples. This is uncharted territory. Rex showed no signs of aggression, but we still have to consider every possibility. We'll need to monitor him closely for the next 48 hours. Evan nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on the screens. Something inside him felt tethered, like a thread stretched across the miles of grassland, connecting him to a lion who had trusted him against every instinct. Hours passed. The sun climbed, shadows shifted, and Rex finally appeared, first as a flicker of movement, then a solid form emerging from behind a low ridge. The cameras zoomed in automatically. Rex moved with that same powerful grace, his head held high, his injured paw barely showing a limp. The sedation had worn off. He was whole again. He was himself. Evan's breath caught when Rex stopped, lifted his head, and slowly turned, facing the monitoring ridge, facing the direction where Evan stood. Hannah leaned in, stunned. He's looking for something. No, Evan whispered. For someone. Before anyone could respond, Rex gave a deep exhale and lowered himself calmly onto the ground. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't adjusting. He was simply waiting. Mark shook his head, speechless. This isn't normal. None of this is normal. Alicia walked in just in time to hear his protest. That's because it isn't rooted in instinct, she said. This is something else entirely, something we're only beginning to understand. She turned to Evan, her eyes warm, thoughtful, almost reverent. Whatever passed between you and Rex out there, it's not done, she said. He's not done. Evan didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart felt heavy, full, trembling with awe. Rex lifted his head slightly, scanning the horizon, waiting. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the open wild, Evan finally understood. The unthinkable wasn't that Rex had spared him. It wasn't that Rex had touched him. It wasn't even that Rex sought him out. The unthinkable was this. A lion had chosen trust over instinct, and that choice was changing everything. By late afternoon, the sun hung low over the mesas, draping long amber shadows across the reserve. The desert heat had softened into something gentler, something almost contemplative, as if the land itself were absorbing the weight of what had happened. Word of Rex's extraordinary behavior traveled beyond Silver Mesa's borders, first whispered through wildlife circles, then picked up by researchers, journalists, and conservationists who had long believed predator cognition was more limited than this moment suggested. But inside the reserve, where the scent of dust and sagebrush mingled with the hum of distant insects, the world felt intimate, small, quiet, changed. Evan stood on the elevated observation platform overlooking the northern range, the same place researchers monitored released animals from a safe vantage point. A pair of binoculars hung loosely around his neck, though he barely used them. His eyes were trained on the ground below, scanning for any sign of Rex. The lion had remained in view for hours earlier, alternating between resting and pacing in slow, thoughtful circles, as if reacquainting himself with a world that was his again. But as the sun drifted downward, Rex had disappeared into a stretch of taller grass. Evan wasn't worried. Somehow, he knew Rex would return when he was ready. Behind him, Maya clicked her camera in slow, rhythmic intervals. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her lens aimed at the horizon, at the golden expanse where Evan's attention lingered. The quiet companionship between them felt strangely fitting. Two observers witnessing something rare, something precious. Tom eventually joined them, boots scuffing the wooden boards. He exhaled heavily. "Everyone at headquarters is calling," he muttered. "Some want to shut down the reintroduction entirely. Some want to study Rex in a controlled environment. Some think we're misinterpreting everything." Evan didn't turn. "What do you think?" Tom hesitated. The wind rustled through the tall grass below. "I think we saw something today I can't explain, and I don't like not being able to explain things." "That's honest," Evan said quietly. Tom stepped beside him, arms crossed. "I just hope honesty doesn't get you hurt." Evan's gaze softened. "It's not about me." "Maybe it should be," Tom replied. "You keep throwing yourself into danger for animals that wouldn't hesitate to kill someone who approached them the wrong way." "Rex didn't," Evan said simply. Tom sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's what scares me. Not that he didn't hurt you, but that you're beginning to believe he never will." Evan didn't respond. Some truths weren't ready to be spoken aloud, not yet. As dusk dimmed the sky, Hannah joined them too, her expression a mixture of worry and wonder. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said. "His wound is healing, but he still needs monitoring. We'll have to approach eventually. The question is whether he'll tolerate anyone but you." Maya clicked another photo, capturing Evan's silhouette against the fading sky. "He'll tolerate who he chooses," she murmured. "That's the whole point." A burst of movement in the field caught Evan's eye. He raised the binoculars instantly. Grass parted. A shape emerged. His breath hitched. Rex. The lion's huge frame stepped through the yellow reeds, head held high, mane glowing with threads of burnt copper. He moved with the confidence of a creature reclaiming his kingdom. Each step controlled, powerful, deliberate. The evening light washed over him, casting him in colors only the desert could paint. For a moment, no one on the observation deck breathed. Rex reached an open stretch and stopped. His head turned slowly, toward the platform, toward Evan. Tom inhaled sharply. "He's looking at us." "No," Maya whispered. "He's looking at him." Evan lowered the binoculars, heart pounding with a quiet intensity. He stepped closer to the railing. The lion's eyes, even from a distance, seemed to brighten at the movement. He began walking, not fast, not with urgency, but with intention. Each stride in Evan's direction felt like a proclamation echoing across the wild landscape. Rex closed half the distance before stopping again. He didn't roar. He didn't pace. He simply stood there, as if waiting for him. Evan's breath trembled. "He's checking in," he murmured, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Hannah turned sharply. "Checking in?" Evan nodded. Lions in a pride check on each other. Not always physically, sometimes just visually. It's their way of saying they're safe, that they're okay. Tom blinked, confused. "You're saying he's acting like you're part of his pride?" Evan didn't answer, but his silence was loud. Rex lifted his head, snout brushing the warm breeze. A soft chuff carried faintly across the distance, not loud, but unmistakable, even from far away. Hannah's lips parted in disbelief. "How is that possible?" Maya whispered. "Because he remembers." They watched in silence as Rex lowered himself onto the ground, positioning his body sideways, a gesture lions often show when offering trust or inviting calmness. His tail swept gently across the earth, a slow, steady motion. His eyes remained on Evan. A bridge had formed between them, one built not of walls or wires, but of something invisible and impossible to categorize. It stretched across species, across instincts, across fear, a thread pulled taut by something deeper than survival. Evan felt that thread tug softly on his heart. He leaned against the railing, his voice just loud enough for the others to hear. "He's saying he's okay," he murmured, "and he wants me to know it." Tom exhaled with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "This is bigger than all of us." Alicia, who had joined quietly at the back of the platform, nodded slowly. "This could change how we understand predator intelligence forever. But science aside," she looked at Evan with a softness he didn't expect. "It's rare to witness connection like this, between any two beings." Below them, Rex lifted his head and gave one last chuff, softer this time, almost like a farewell for the night. Then he stood, stretched, and walked back into the tall grass, tail swaying gently behind him as the darkness swallowed his silhouette. Evan remained at the railing long after the others stepped away, eyes fixed on the path where Rex had disappeared. The desert wind brushed against him, carrying with it the lingering echo of that final sound. A connection had been made, a recognition shared. A bridge built, not through force but through trust freely given. And as night settled over Silver Mesa, Evan understood something with complete clarity. Rex hadn't just walked into the wild earlier that morning. He had walked into his own future, and somehow, impossibly, Evan was now a part of it. Months passed, marked not by the usual rhythm of wildlife reports or morning rounds, but by the quiet anticipation that filled the air each time Evan drove out to the northern observation post. The desert changed with the season, its heat easing into cooler twilight evenings, its colors shifting from blazing gold to deep earthy copper. But one thing remained constant: the space where Evan waited, watching the hills where Rex now ruled as a fully reclaimed lion of the wild. News of Rex had spread far beyond Silver Mesa. Researchers came from universities across the country. Conservation groups requested data, footage, interviews. People spoke of Rex not just as a rescued animal, but as a symbol, proof of a kind of connection once dismissed as fantasy. But for Evan, none of that mattered as much as the quiet truth beneath it all. Rex was alive. Rex was thriving, and Rex still remembered him. Every few weeks, Evan would return to the ridge at dawn or dusk, the preferred hours of lions, when the world softened and shadows stretched long across the grassland. He never called out. He never tried to coax Rex closer. He simply waited, letting the desert breathe around him. And each time, without fail, Rex appeared. Not always close, not always for long. Sometimes just a distant silhouette paused on a rise, mane catching the wind. Other times a shape moving through the tall grass, barely visible but unmistakable. And every now and then, Rex would walk far enough that Evan could see the full strength he had regained. The proud, powerful stride. The healed paw barely betraying its old injury. The confident sweep of a king surveying everything he had reclaimed. It was on one such evening, 3 months after Rex's reintroduction, that the extraordinary happened again. Evan had been sitting in the observation truck for nearly an hour, jotting notes on a clipboard. The sun hovered just above the horizon, a burning orange disk bleeding into the land. Maya, who was documenting the long-term effects of the reintroduction, sat nearby, adjusting her camera settings for the shifting light. Hannah watched the telemetry signals on her tablet from the back seat, while Alicia stood outside the vehicle, arms folded, scanning the plains. "Movement on the west side," Hannah murmured. Evan lifted his binoculars. There, emerging from the tree line, was Rex. The lion was not alone. Behind him trailed 3 lionesses, their forms sleek and strong, moving in synchronized rhythm as though guided by Rex's silent authority. This was the pride he had been slowly integrating with, one that had accepted him as their leader. "He did it," Maya whispered, raising her camera. "He actually did it." But Evan already knew he had. The pride moved like a golden river across the dry earth, purposeful and calm. When they neared the ridge, Rex halted. His head lifted, his nostrils flared. The breeze shifted, bringing the faint sense of humans and metal from the observation truck. Rex turned his head. He saw him. Evan felt that familiar weight settle in his chest, the same weight he had felt the day Rex pressed his head against his leg. It was recognition, unmistakable and immediate. Rex's amber eyes softened, and he released a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air like a distant drum. But then something unexpected happened. A lioness broke formation. She trotted ahead of Rex, slowing only when she reached a shaded patch of grass. She crouched low, muscles coiling beneath her as she watched a small herd of antelope grazing near a rocky outcrop. The rest of the pride followed her lead. Evan knew what was coming. Within seconds, the pride launched into a coordinated hunt. Swift, silent, efficient. Dust lifted into the air, swirling in the golden light. Hooves thundered, bodies twisted in powerful arcs. It was the raw ballet of survival, beautiful and brutal in the way only nature could be. The pride secured their prey. Evan lowered the binoculars, letting out a breath that felt too heavy for his chest. "He's providing for them," he murmured. "He's finally the leader he was meant to be." Hannah nodded, eyes damp. "He's not just surviving. He's thriving." They watched in silence as the pride began to feed. But then, as the others settled around their kill, Rex did something none of them expected. The lion dragged a portion of the carcass away. Not much, just a few pounds of meat, and carried it several yards from the feeding site. He paused, lifting his head toward the observation truck. Toward Evan. The desert went still. Maya froze with her camera halfway to her face. "He's offering," she whispered. "He's bringing it to you." "It's not for me," Evan said softly, though his throat tightened. "Lions don't offer food. Not like that." "Then what is it?" Alicia asked. Evan swallowed. "It's a message. He's showing me he's okay, that he's providing for his pride, that he's whole." The lion stood for a long moment beside his offering, mane glowing like fire in the dying sun. He didn't growl. He didn't pace. He simply waited until he was certain Evan had seen him. Then he turned back to the pride. Evan watched him go, heart full of pride, full of peace, full of a kind of awe he couldn't put into words. A breeze swept across the plains, brushing through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of earth and life and freedom. And then it came. A roar. Not a warning, not a claim, not a threat, but a call. Low at first, then rising, filling the valley like thunder. It echoed across the mesas, rolled over the observation ridge, and settled deep in Evan's chest. A roar that was not meant to frighten, but to acknowledge, to reach across distance and species. Maya lowered her camera. "He's talking to you." Evan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. "I know." When he opened them again, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of lavender and rose. The pride disappeared into the growing darkness, their silhouettes merging with the land. But the echo of Rex's call lingered, carried by the wind long after the lions were gone. Quietly, Evan whispered into the fading light. "They said I'd die helping you, but you taught me what living really means." The desert held his words gently, as though tucking them away for safekeeping. And somewhere beyond the tall grass, Rex answered. Not with a roar this time, but with a soft, distant chuff carried on the wind. A reminder, a farewell, and a promise that their story was not an ending at all, but a beginning written across the vast, wild heart of the land they both now belonged to. The unthinkable had happened, and the world would never see lions or humans the same way again. If you made it this far, I'd love to hear one simple thing from you. Drop a 1 in the comments if Rex's journey moved you even a little, or just leave a 0 if you're lost for words but still felt something. Your comments help this story reach more hearts, and they tell me you want more. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell. We have many more real-life animal stories coming, stories of courage, connection, and the unexpected bonds that change everything. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to share the next story with you.